Prologue. In the previous chapter, Bob/Missy faced increasing discomfort at work due to his growingly feminine attire and met a new friend, John, the husband of his secretary, Carol. John, now known as Jenny, was introduced to Bob during a dinner party where Bob was in full Missy mode. The encounter with the Sissies led to a difficult day of shopping, which included manicures, facials, shoe shopping, and lunch at a more relaxed restaurant, all while dressed in outfits that challenged Bob's sense of masculinity. Work, work, work. After the exhausting experience at the mall, Bob was eager to return to the comfort of his office, though his wardrobe continued to lean towards the feminine. Karen, his wife, had insisted that Bob dress in increasingly delicate outfits for work, yet compared to the day out with John, he still felt more masculine in the office. While Bob's appearance was indeed more androgynous, Karen was mindful enough not to push him too far so as not to jeopardize his job. Still, his secretary Carol ensured that Bob's sissy side was constantly highlighted and reminded. This morning, Karen had taken it a step further, sending Bob to work in black stretch pants with a flared leg, which zipped at the back, paired with a matching black jacket. The jacket had narrow lapels, padded shoulders, and patch pockets at both the waist and chest. Bob knew he couldn't take the jacket off in public, as the rear zipper of his pants would be too obvious. Underneath, Bob wore a white blouse with a Peter Pan collar and a paisley tie, the only masculine element in his outfit, which barely helped to balance out his look. His footwear for the day consisted of black ankle boots with small, chunky heels. Beneath it all, Bob wore full-cut black underwear, a camisole, opaque tights, and a waist cincher to keep everything in place. Without the cincher, his pants wouldn't even zip. As Bob descended the stairs to leave for work, Karen had another surprise for him. "Missy, I'm going to drive you to work today. Your big, macho car just doesn't match your new image," she said playfully. "But how am I supposed to get to work when you're out of town or busy?" Bob asked, concerned. "Well, I haven't figured that out yet, but I'll pick up a bus schedule for you while you're at work," Karen replied with a smile. "Now grab your purse, sweetie, and let's go. Carol will be very disappointed if you're late." Reluctantly, Bob grabbed the black Coach bag and threw the strap over his shoulder. His essentials were packed: extra pantyhose, lip gloss, a nail file, and his wallet. Although he had become accustomed to carrying a purse, it was practically a necessity since none of his pants had pockets, and even if they did, his large wallet wouldn't fit. Out of habit, Bob walked to the driver's side of his car, but Karen stopped him. "No, sweetie, I'll drive today," Karen insisted. Bob, feeling humbled, climbed into the passenger seat while Karen took the wheel. He remained silent for the entire drive to the office, embarrassed by the situation. When they arrived, Bob attempted to keep a low profile as he entered the building and made his way to his office. But just as the elevator doors were about to close, a hand appeared and they reopened. Bob grimaced as he saw it was Carol, his secretary, who had just arrived. "Good morning, Missy." Carol greeted him with a smile. "Love your outfit. Did you get it from Talbot's? I swear I saw something like it in their latest catalog." "My wife got it for me," Bob responded, his voice tinged with frustration. "Please, Carol, stop calling me Missy. The others in the office will hear you." Carol just smiled, and as they arrived at their floor, she allowed Bob to exit first, giving him an affectionate pat on the back as he walked by. Bob, now blushing furiously, hurried to his office and quickly shut the door behind him. A few minutes later, Carol entered without knocking and took a seat across from Bob's desk. Carol leaned back in her chair with a calculating look. "With all the extra expenses tied to a new wardrobe for your girlfriend and my husband Jenny," she started, "I'm going to need a raise to cover the costs." She paused, making sure her words had the intended impact. "And if you want to keep your little secret here in the office, you might want to help me out." Bob realized that he had no choice. He quickly dialed the HR department and requested that they process a promotion and the raise that Carol had asked for. Carol, pleased with his quick compliance, smiled at him. "Thank you," she said, giving him a playful wink before leaving his office. A few minutes later, Carol returned, her smile more mischievous. Laura and Eric are on their way for your weekly meeting, she announced. I think you should get ready. Go ahead and take off your pants and give them to me, she said firmly. Bob blinked, confused. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, if you don't want me to spill the beans about your new personal hobby to everyone in the office, you're going to have to listen to me, Carol said with a sly grin. Give me your pants now. Bob felt his heart race. He had no choice but to comply, knowing that without his pants, his fear of being humiliated during the meeting was real. The idea of sitting there exposed, hoping he could stay seated without revealing his undershirt and tights, was mortifying. He reluctantly handed his pants over to Carol, then seated himself, hoping to make it through the meeting without incident. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Carol quickly hung the pants in the coat closet before leaving the office. Don't worry, you'll be fine, she called over her shoulder as she invited Laura and Eric inside. Noticing Bob's red face, Eric, his boss, raised an eyebrow. Are you okay, Bob? You look a little flushed, he commented. Bob, feeling more embarrassed than ever, forced a smile. No, I'm fine, just a little warm, he mumbled, feeling trapped. Why don't you take your jacket off? Laura suggested. Bob stiffened. He knew that if he removed the jacket, the camisole he was wearing would be visible under his blouse, and he'd have to stand to remove it, exposing even more. I'm fine, thanks, he replied quickly, eager to start the meeting and get it over with. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the meeting ended. As soon as the door closed behind Laura and Eric, Bob bolted up from his desk and hurried to retrieve his pants. But as he was stepping into them, Carol burst into his office, unable to hold back a laugh. Caught you with your pants down, she teased, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Bob almost lost his balance as he fumbled with the pants. He quickly managed to finish dressing as Carol doubled over in laughter. Karen just called, Carol said between giggles. She wants you to meet her in the parking garage. She's got a surprise for you. Oh, and don't forget your purse. More surprises? Bob muttered, his sarcasm barely concealing his growing frustration. He made his way to the parking garage and couldn't believe his eyes when he saw a powder blue VW Bug convertible parked in his usual spot. The vanity license plate read Missy's. And standing next to the car was Karen, grinning widely. Surprise, she exclaimed. I bought you a new car to match your new style. Let's go for a spin, and don't worry, you can drive. Bob was speechless. Just the day before, he had been driving his sleek, black luxury car, and now he was staring at a small, feminine convertible. He climbed into the car, not sure what to say, and slowly backed out of the space. As they exited the garage, Karen reached into the back seat and handed Bob a light blue visor decorated with floral appliques. Better put this on, honey, she said cheerfully. We have to protect our complexions from the sun. Bob couldn't believe the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, driving around the city in a chic car with a matching visor, and Karen had even insisted that he wear a pair of women's sunglasses with pink lenses and rhinestone butterflies at the corners. The humiliation was overwhelming. Reaching for his cell phone, Bob called the office and informed his secretary, Carol, that he wouldn't be returning. Carol, ever perceptive, sensed his frustration and couldn't resist adding to it. So, how do you like your new surprise? She teased. I love convertibles, but they can really mess up your hair. You better keep a scarf handy to keep your look neat. Home on the range. While Bob endured humiliations at the hands of his wife and secretary, Carol's husband, John, was facing his own struggles. Carol and John owned a ranch outside of town, their primary income coming from raising cattle and boarding horses. John worked the ranch full-time, with a couple of ranch hands assisting him during busier times. However, the recent changes Carol had insisted upon had complicated his life significantly. Gone were the days when he could go to work simply wearing jeans and a work shirt, unshaven and carefree. Carol had begun to require that John pay more attention to his appearance, leading to changes in his wardrobe and grooming habits. Now, preparations to go to work took well over an hour as John had to ensure his entire body was shaved, his makeup was flawless, and his hair styled to Carol's liking. Though John was working full-time on the ranch, he no longer felt like the same person. He had to wear tight-fitting, colorful clothing, often paired with feminine accessories. His belts, once simple and functional, were now adorned with rhinestones and in the shape of hearts or flowers. His footwear had changed from rugged ropers to pastel-colored boots that matched his outfits, and his jewelry collection had expanded to include silver and turquoise pieces, such as rings, bracelets, and necklaces. While John's hands were often covered by his leather gloves, his nails were carefully manicured and painted. Despite these drastic changes, John had mostly avoided ridicule from the part-time ranch hands. However, his twice-weekly trips to the feed store in town were another story. Dressed in a pair of snug, wheat-colored Wrangler jeans, a turquoise top tied at the waist, and a belt with a large rhinestone-encrusted buckle, John became the target of teasing and harsh comments as he entered the store. The feed store was about as far from a feminine space as one could get, and John's presence there, dressed in the outfit Carol had selected for him, sparked snickers from the cowboys hanging around. They used to be his peers, but now they couldn't help but poke fun at his new look. "Nice hat, Johnny girl," one of the cowboys teased. "That little hatband goes perfectly with your blouse." John was grateful for his hat, as it helped cover the restyled and highlighted hair he had recently gotten to meet Carol's standards. He hurried through his order, trying not to draw attention, and quickly left the store. Unfortunately, the teasing followed him outside as he went to his truck. "Can we help you, little lady?" one of the dock workers called out. "Sorry, John. Didn't recognize you in that pretty little outfit." "Let us load it for you, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." The workers took their time loading the feed and hay into John's truck, all the while continuing their jokes. John just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. He finally managed to drive away, his mind racing with dread, knowing he would have to endure the same humiliation again later that week. When he returned to the ranch, Carol was waiting for him outside the barn, holding a picnic basket. She told him to take a break for lunch. Inside the basket was a small salad, a cup of yogurt, and a diet soda. John, used to hearty meals to fuel him through his exhausting ranch chores, felt a pang of frustration. Carol reminded him that he needed to watch his weight, and if he didn't shed a few pounds, he would have to wear a corset every day. The thought of wearing a corset while doing physical work was unbearable, but John knew there was little he could do. He picked at his lunch, his appetite lost as he thought about the day ahead. In addition to managing the ranch, John also had a passion for rodeo. He had once trained for calf roping and saddle bronc riding, but since Carol's changes, he had been restricted to barrel racing. It was a painful blow to his sense of masculinity, having to give up the more rugged, traditionally male, events for a sport that was considered more feminine. One afternoon, Carol decided it was time for a change. "I think you should sell that bay horse, Jenny," she said matter-of-factly. "You won't be doing any more competition roping, so there's no need for him. Helen's daughter, Darla, is selling her paint pony, and I think you should try it out for barrel racing." John's heart sank. "You want me to sell Scout?" he exclaimed. "I've worked so hard with that horse. He's like family to me." Carol gave him a firm look. "You're going to sell him, Jenny, and that's final. If you don't like Darla's pony, we can keep looking, but I think Cupcake will be perfect for you." John, struggling to hold back tears, thought about trading in his beloved Scout for a pony named Cupcake. The emotional weight of the decision was overwhelming. He couldn't understand how it had come to this. "Quit crying, you big baby," Carol snapped. "Your mascara is going to run, and then you'll really look like a mess when Darla gets here. Gotta dance." Another Monday morning arrived, and Bob was once again filled with dread as he headed back to work. He cruised along the freeway in his new Bug convertible, top down at Karen's insistence. His hairstyle was protected by a cute little visor that matched his new car perfectly, right down to the flower power appliques on the visor bill. Today, Bob was dressed in his now regular work attire, feminine slacks in a deep wine color with a rear zipper and a silky blouse. His shoes were cordovan-colored women's loafers with a small heel and a mock tassel on the toes. As usual, Bob wore his day-of-the-week panties, pantyhose, today in suntan, and a camisole that faintly peeked through his blouse. The tapered jacket that completed his career woman look did nothing to enhance his masculinity. When he arrived at the office, he parked in the employee lot, a spot he had been forced to give up after trading his luxury car for the feminine little VW. He was bending over the rear of the car to put the top up when Joe Mitchell, one of his old rivals, snuck up behind him. Joe pinched his rear playfully and whistled. "I sure do love the way those slacks fit, Bob," Joe teased. "What color are your panties today?" Bob tried to ignore the teasing, but it was hard to keep his composure as he retrieved his purse and a Mary Inglebright canvas bag that had replaced his previous briefcase. Joe insisted on holding the bag for him, despite Bob declining, and even opened doors for him, giving Bob's backside a friendly pat as he passed. It was hard for Bob to believe this was his reality. Not long ago, Joe had been eager to impress him, but now he seemed to take pleasure in teasing him. Bob made his way to his office, where Carol, his secretary, made her usual comments about his attire. As his role in the office had shifted, he was now responsible for tasks like keeping the coffee pots full and the office supplies stocked. Bob went into the coffee service area and returned with a cup for Carol, as she had requested. He had stopped drinking coffee since it made him take more frequent trips to the restroom, and he now had to use the women's executive lounge, so he was careful about how often he visited. Sitting at his desk, Bob tried to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept wandering. More and more, he found himself holed up in his office to avoid taunting from the women in the department and to keep his new look hidden from the men. Bob's performance had been slipping, and his boss, Laura Simpson, was noticing. Much to Bob's dismay, Laura had scheduled a meeting with him for the following Monday. Bob dreaded the meeting, knowing it was likely going to address his declining performance. Laura had once been his subordinate, but had since leapfrogged him in the company, and Bob worried that his past treatment of her would soon come back to haunt him. Finally, the end of the day arrived, and Bob had to change for his dance class. Karen had scheduled lessons at Joanne's dance studio 3 nights a week. Tonight, he had his original country line dance class, followed by an introduction to jazz. Bob retrieved his bag from the coat closet and made his way to the women's lounge to change. When he emerged, he was dressed in his dance outfit, a pink leotard, white tights, red softy shorts with "Dance" printed on the seat, and a white spaghetti-strap t-shirt with "Angel" spelled out in silver sparkles across the front. On his feet were a pair of red sandals. "Cute little outfit, Missy," Carol teased, walking up behind him. "Glad to see Karen's still got you dancing. Are there any other sissies in your class?" Blushing, Bob replied, "About half of the people in my country line dance class are in similar situations to mine. Joanne, the owner of the studio, does great business in helping husbands through her dance classes. My jazz class is mostly women, though. There's one other younger man in that class, and he's pretty much in the same boat as me, but his stepmother is the one pushing him into this, not his wife." Bob quickly ducked out of the office to avoid anyone seeing him in his dance outfit. He got to his little car, lowered the top, and put his visor on before driving to the studio. The office security guard gave him a playful wave as he left the parking lot, but Bob was already feeling the sting of embarrassment. When he arrived at the studio, Joanne, the owner, greeted him with a smile. "How's my favorite little dancer today?" she asked. "I'm fine, I guess," Bob replied. "I really hate walking across the parking lot with those construction workers next door teasing me. It's embarrassing." Joanne laughed. "You're not the only one who complains about them, Missy. Most of the women who take lessons here have to deal with it too. The other sissies get the same treatment. But you know, I bet there's at least one of those workers who secretly wishes he could wear the outfits you get to wear." Bob felt his face turn red as he entered the studio. He joined the other dancers, setting his bag in the corner and changing into his dance shoes. The other students were dressed similarly, though the more feminine dancers wore lacy skirts and pastel leotards, while the women mostly wore exercise gear. "All right, girlies. Time to line up and get started," Joanne called out as the music began. The class worked through their routines, preparing for a competition later in the month. Joanne, being very competitive, was tough on her students and wasn't afraid to offer sharp criticism when things didn't go right. One unfortunate dancer had to endure her wrath when he turned the wrong way during a routine. "You little fairy," Joanne snapped. "Get back in line and see if you can keep up. If you mess up again, I'll make sure everyone knows about it. And I just might get one of those construction workers to help me with your little attitude problem." The dancer returned to the line, determined not to make another mistake. The rest of the class went by uneventfully, but Bob couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly judged by everyone around him. After class, Bob and Dan, another sissy dancer, stayed behind for their jazz class. Dan, dressed similarly to Bob in a leotard and wrap skirt, wore lace pantyhose, making him appear even more feminine. Jazz class was more athletic, and both Bob and Dan struggled to keep up with the fast-paced routines. Joanne had to stop the class several times to allow them to catch up. After class, Joanne gathered the two sissies in her office. "You two are just not cutting it in jazz class," she said firmly. "But don't worry. I've come up with a solution. I'm going to start a special class just for sissies after the line dance class. We'll cover jazz, tap, and ballet, and I'll use that class to form a sissy dance team for competitions." Bob looked at Dan nervously. He wasn't sure what Joanne had in mind for the special competitions, but he dreaded the idea of being forced into ballet, especially wearing a tutu. Joanne handed them each a flyer and told them to give it to their superiors. Bob knew she was referring to Karen and guessed that Dan would be giving his flyer to his stepmother. Joanne also mentioned that Dan needed a ride home and that Bob should drive him. "You two should hold hands when you cross the parking lot," Joanne added with a grin. As they walked hand in hand to the car, the construction workers shouted teasing remarks. Bob and Dan quickly got into the car and drove away, eager to escape the parking lot. The drive to Dan's house was uneventful, but they still attracted curious stares from other drivers. When they arrived at Dan's house, his stepmother and stepsister greeted them. Dan's stepmother, Elizabeth, was all smiles as she introduced Bob to the family. "Well, Missy, welcome to the family," Elizabeth said warmly. Dan, nervous, made introductions, and soon they were all sitting on the porch enjoying lemonade. Dan had even put on a frilly apron while preparing the drinks. After some awkward conversation, Bob excused himself, knowing he would be in trouble with Karen if he stayed too late. Elizabeth allowed him to leave, but not before insisting that he give Dan a goodbye kiss, all while Brenda took pictures. 4. When Bob arrived home on Friday, Karen greeted him at the door with a mischievous grin. "I'm so looking forward to this weekend, Missy," she exclaimed. "I've planned a busy couple of days for us." Bob bowed his head in resignation, dreading what other surprises Karen had in store for him. As much as work was difficult, it felt like a welcome break from the constant teasing he endured at home. "I've made us a tea time for tomorrow at the club," Karen continued. "We tee off at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and with the beautiful forecast, we should have a glorious day." She paused. "To warm up, I think we should go to the range this evening. Go ahead and change while I get our clubs ready. I've laid out your clothes for the range." Bob reluctantly walked to their bedroom, already knowing that Karen had likely chosen something more feminine than he would have preferred. On the bed was a yellow pleated knit skirt, clearly very short, and a matching pale yellow golf shirt. The shirt had a V-neck, much like the ones he had seen female golfers wear. Karen had also left out yellow panties, suntan pantyhose, and a sports bra. Bob sighed, knowing he had no choice but to comply. After dressing, Bob checked his reflection in the mirror. His sports bra was visible through the thin material of the shirt, and the lace of his panties peeked out from under the skirt with every movement. He wasn't sure what felt worse, the physical discomfort or the emotional strain of having to wear these clothes. "Quit admiring yourself and get your shoes on," Karen teased, walking into the room and catching Bob off guard. Bob sat down on the bed and put on the bright white anklets with a yellow band and little yellow ball on the heel, followed by white canvas keds. "Let's go, Missy," Karen commanded. "You really need to hit at least one bucket of balls to get used to those new clubs I got for you. Some of the top LPGA pros use these clubs, and I'm sure they'll help your game a lot." Bob followed Karen to the garage, where she showed him the new clubs she had purchased. He shook his head in disbelief when he saw the Callaway Gems ladies irons and the Nancy Lopez Delma driver, all in a sky blue leather bag with pastel-colored floral stitching. There was also an assortment of golf gloves in various colors and stuffed animal head covers for the woods, including a kitten and a bunny. Finally, Bob noticed the golf balls, one box of pink, yellow, blue, and orange titanium balls with pink ribbon logos, and another box of blossoms balls adorned with pictures of flowers.